Peter, thank you for joining me.
Hey, my pleasure. Thanks for inviting me.
Looking forward to this. Tell me, who is Peter Brodnicki?
Who am I? I don't know. I'm just a very passionate person about everything I do and believe in. I guess everybody looking at me or knows me will just say, like, your two main passions in life are your business and Fulham, my football club. One I've followed for 50 years and the other one I've been running for 25 years. So this year is literally my 50th and 25th anniversary of the two, what have historically been the biggest things in my life. So those are probably the two things that dominate my life more than anything and have done over so many years, I guess.
Well, the early influence for you would have been Fulham, I guess, going to watch the team that you become passionate supporter of.
Yeah.
I'm interested in kind of the why, if you like, behind starting the Mortgage Advice Bureau, which you started 25 years ago.
Yeah, it's 2000, yeah. Absolutely.
So tell me about those sort of early influences, who and what, outside of the football. Maybe there was an influence there that then led you starting that business.
Yeah, I think, my father ran his own business. He ran quite a specialist business, a pharmaceutical translation business. So he was always, and he got me interested in, he also got me interested in sort of shares at an early age. I think sort of when I was like 13, 14, he sort of, rather than getting the sort of presents you'd expect as a 13, 14-year-old, you'd get some shares in some companies so you could follow them, just small amounts so you could follow what they're doing. So he got me sort of looking into business and how different businesses operate, how different shares perform, which is a bit unusual at that age.
Were you allowed to trade them, or were you kind of just observing and watching?
I could, he asked me to observe and watch, and then a few years later, through him, he allowed me to trade them. So it was quite interesting because it sort of helped me learn more about different sectors, different businesses. I actually found that really interesting. I never actually got on that well at school, didn't see the relevance of it, didn't do particularly well at school, but that was something that actually really interested me and sort of got my passion going a little bit. So, and I've always wanted to get into the financial sector, and I've always been in sort of financial services, I guess. In the 90s, I set up my own business, but through my partner, I worked with Legal & General at the time. And she set up the mortgage broking business, which was registered under Legal & General. And I was always at some point going to go and leave the corporate world and move into my own business.
You knew that from an early age?
Yeah, I knew I always wanted to do that, but I wanted to gain the experience. I enjoyed actually in some areas, sometimes you stay in for too long because you enjoy them too much, you need to progress. But the plan was always there. And then the Mortgage Advice Bureau thing was interesting because Mortgage Advice Bureau was actually a small firm in Derbyshire. And it was linked to Legal & General as well. And through my role in Legal & General, I met the guys there. And they really inspired me. They were top individuals, very inspirational. They always said, I wish I wasn't born in Derby. I was in London, I would have made a lot more money. And they tried to get me across to come in and, because I came and did like a business consultancy for them and what they should be doing. And they sort of then tried to get me across to come into the business. And then to take it sort of to another level and sort of take it on a national basis. So I sort of told them what they should be doing and how the structure they should have in the business. And eventually they sort of convinced me to come across. So I left Legal & General and then actually backed my business into that business, which my partner was running at the time. And then sort of set up a new co. They had a minority stake in that. I had a majority stake in the new co. I backed their original business into the new co, my old business into the new co. And that sort of evolved over the first few years, and then I grew the business from there.
What was the why behind it?
I think the timing of stepping out of corporate life and going into sort of right into my own business full time there was some regulatory change at the time, and a lot of the big insurers that were running the financial services networks pulled out. A lot of that was because the endowment policy and the time sort of had its day, and I guess that was a cash cow that sort of fed a lot of the industry. And I saw an opportunity really to step in with a new model at that point to replace the gap that they had left. I sort of created like a strategic partner model for sort of forward-thinking firms and specialist sectors. So
it's real innovation, proper entrepreneurship.
It didn't seem so at the time.
No.
It just seemed a sort of very obvious, logical thing to do, which I guess, if you're going to be called an entrepreneur, you don't really realise you are one. You just make decisions based on the right time and something that seems natural and obvious to you. And that's what it was at the time.
Yeah.
and what we did is rather than sort of become a sort of a business that was for everybody, we worked on certain niches first to become experts in it, and then moved on to the next niche, onto the next niche. So yes, it was a combination of sort of, setting up a new company, pulling these other two in, and then sort of moving to Derby because I was living in London, and so spending most of my week in Derby. Still travel up there sort of every single week. So that's 25 years now. So yeah, that was quite difficult because I had some challenging times. The year I moved up there, my father died, and the year after my father died, my mum went into a nursing home with dementia. So it was quite hard, sort of, I guess, driving this new business, being away,
keeping all focused
on all those things happening. Yeah. So yeah, it was quite a challenging time at that point, I think, to get through those first few years.
Yeah, I mean, entrepreneurship is a major interest of mine. I would love to know, there's a personal distraction there, if you like, very much family come first, and you're trying to set a business up. That fast forward to now, I believe it's 266 million of revenue you did in 2024, and over over 20 billion of loans that you've handled. Huge numbers. So along the way from dealing with those early years, I'd love to know sort of the hardest challenges you've got. You've got perspective and maturity now to look back.
Yeah.
And there's two kind of questions there. You've got all sorts of external factors that come your way, from changes of government and waking up probably in the morning and seeing legislative changes and think, how do I interpret that? Yeah. And then as Peter, as the entrepreneur, as the person that's driving that company, bringing in the right team to support you, where have been the biggest challenges for you?
Yeah, I think it's sort of it's having too many ideas and sort of trying to sort of curb those and
not be distracted from
focus on the stepping stones you need to get to. It was interesting actually because in the industry I built my business with my head right down. At the time, and sort of before the financial crisis, the industry sort of was quite high profile. There were a lot of events and awards and overseas trips, and it was quite high profile. It was, and I sort of put my head down through all of that. And I remember going to an award ceremony once in 2008, which is a bit ironic because it was about the time everything sort of on that side sort of came to an end on the back of the financial crisis. And I sort of saw these people sort of winning awards, and the person who invited me sort of said, well, I said to them, well, why are these people winning awards? We're better than them. And they said, well, it's because you just put your head down, you don't come out, you don't get involved in our industry, you're just focused on growing your business. That
wasn't a priority to you.
It wasn't. You weren't shouting from the rooftops about it, trying to make a small business look big. I just wanted to sort of, I really wanted to shout from the rooftops when I knew I'd got something to talk about. So that was quite an interesting time, and I was thinking, okay, so what do I need to do to win awards then? And they said, well, you need to be on these panels, you need to get involved in industry more, and and support the wider industry. So I thought, okay, well, if I'm going to do this, which I don't really want to do because I haven't got the time to do it or the inclination. I'm not that sociable really. So I sort of made it sort of my mission to work out what I needed to do to win these awards.
That's interesting because that's putting yourself out of your comfort zone. You just almost awkwardly said, I'm not that social, but you chose to. You knew it was.
I had to do it because it was. I don't think it was right early on. I think a lot of people are trying to raise their profile too early when they haven't got the substance, and they get too taken over by that rather than focusing on their business. But I did realise we're at a stage where we did need to step up to that next stage. And if my wider ambitions were to be realised, I needed to increase that awareness, the brand awareness, and everything else. So that's what I did. And we just last year we clocked through 250 awards. Since 2010. So and it's pleasing because it's through. It's not just on mortgage performance, but in diversity, inclusion, and charity stuff, and various other things we do across the group. So over the years, that's evolved, and we've been recognised, from in a number of different aspects. And when you're running a business, that's quite a nice thing to get.
It is.
It's quite lonely at the top, so it's good for my team because it's acknowledgement of all the hard work they do and everything. So it was quite interesting because it was I don't want to do this stuff too. Right, I'm going to work out and do it properly, and if I'm going to spend time doing it, I want to win some awards. So that's how it went, and so that was just an example of that sort of change, I guess, in the business.
Absolutely, and 250 awards. I mean, is there one there, or even a couple that stand out that you're most proud of? And that's a bit of a harsh question because it covers actual numbers, success, and then, like you mentioned, diversity and inclusion, which is a huge change you'll have seen in the last 25 years. Absolutely. There probably was no award for that until relatively recently.
Yeah.
Where do you sit with that whole kind of? I'm so glad we won that one.
I think when the first time you win any award in a new category, it's pleasing because it's acknowledgement that people see what you're doing, the efforts you're making, and I guess I've got to be a little bit selfish. There's only a handful of those that are personal awards. Most of those are company awards. So it is nice when you achieve the personal award, for business leader or strategist of the year, wherever it might be. So those were quite nice because no one was tapping me on the head and said, well done. So that was quite nice. But generally it was just great for the business and receiving that profile. So,
Yeah.
and sort of getting into new sectors that, again, we looked at, well, why are we winning awards in those areas? Well, maybe we're not good enough. We need to focus more on those areas and not take it for granted. And so, in a way, it sort of drove us to make sure, that we were looking at all those different niches. And
you mentioned the word loneliness there. It's really interesting. So that kind of decision making, ultimately, that you are responsible for at the top, is empowering, but also at times is potentially intimidating, even for someone like yourself. That clearly, I'd love to open that up, and there must be times that stand out for you where you've almost had that whole, actually you can shut the door and you can have that moment to think, what the hell do I do now? But actually it's on me. Talk me through that.
Yeah, there are some of those, but at the same time, that sort of the unknown is actually quite motivational as well. So I think probably the biggest one was actually around that same time, the financial crisis in 2008, where sort of the remortgage market sort of fell apart completely. Any specialist type lending disappeared, buy-to-let market pretty much disappeared, housing market sort of dropped by 65%.
It was a scary time.
It was a really scary time.
Huge disruption.
And at that point, I was just literally at that point, I guess, that, I was, the year before was the first year we'd made any proper money, because at that point I just reinvested everything into the business. So what do? Do you batten down the hatches? And actually the big part of, I think, the success we were starting to build there in the business was the people that were in the business that I brought on. Some of those people I brought into the business, not because I could afford it at the time, but they were reflective of where I wanted to take the business. So to cut all these people out and button down the hatches for God knows how long was a tough call. So that was an interesting one, because that was pretty scary, because I put my life on hold. I sacrificed a lot, probably family, everything, to do what I needed to do. But we made a decision in the end. Well, I made a decision in the end, and that was that, look, if the market's that bad, there's an opportunity here to really grab market share if we do the opposite to everybody else. And our model was more of a strategic partner model rather than sort of an aggregator style model. So we were about helping people grow. And so we were in a world where everybody's business had disappeared. So it wasn't about growth, it was about replacing what you've lost. The basic principle of the model was the same. So all I basically agreed with my team was that all the money we'd made the previous year, was the only profit we did have, is we will draw a line and spend that this year to try and turn the corner and justify the overheads we've got, and therefore, grow the business as strongly as we can in that market to justify the overheads and the team I had. And that's what we did. We're prepared to lose that amount that year, and we didn't lose any. We actually made a very small, teeny profit.
You take that.
Yeah, I'll take that. I would have taken that all day long. And then from there, we motored on. So that really was actually quite a,
pivotal moment.
It really was a pivotal moment, because that's the point where you get that momentum and you stand out from the crowd, and suddenly, from having very little profile a few years earlier, everybody heard about MAB. And then we started sort of getting, after that, and we had our first acquisition, we started to get some interest in terms of being acquired ourselves, which was interesting. And the next pivotal moment, I guess, was, do we sell the business? That didn't really sit well with me, because I couldn't see where the value add of the acquirers, apart from paying money, would be for my team and for the people that have trusted MAB with their businesses. So, and also, I'm a bit of a control freak, so, working for someone else didn't really appeal that much. Once you cross to the dark side, it's very hard to come back. So I didn't really want to do that either. So
again, this is decision making.
Yeah.
Either way, you're making these decisions.
Yeah, and so we then, I sort of, I guess I always wanted, going back to the early part of the story, I was fascinated in the stock market. So was my opportunity to look at, could we go and list on the stock market? So that's where we started to look at that as an option. And that was sort of, that's something that would have fascinated me to do. So, I looked at all those options and then made a decision. And when I made the decision, the market was flying There were a lot of IPOs going on, etc., etc. So
it was 2014.
yeah, it was 2014. So the process probably started in about March 2014, and then we sort of went to market in October. Now, between then and October, the world had changed entirely, and I think the stock market fell something like 1,200 points in 2 days. The week we were going to list, and that was another sort of pivotal moment. What do you do? Because the cost and the disruption to go through that process in your business, just to get you to the position to do that was huge, and I couldn't afford to go through it again. So the question at that time is, do we still go for it? And there were two other, I think, listings that week: Virgin and Miller Homes. Both far bigger than ours. So yeah, I made the decision in a taxi. I remember going to our sort of first investor meeting to pitch MAB, and I said, no, we're going to still go for it. All our advisors said pull out, and I said, well, a bit like in 2008, if we do the opposite, we're going to stand out a bit. People are going to probably want to see us.
There's a trend there for you, isn't
yeah, there's diaries are empty, or suddenly they're panicking about investments and everything else, and this idiot turns up and wants to list his business. So if nothing else, they'll be intrigued. So we went for it, and it was a very, very, very traumatic pressure week, seeing sort of 40 or plus 50 investors with this backdrop, and shares still falling in value. And yeah, so we got over the line just. I think it was Financial Times. I can't remember if it was or not now. Should do really, shouldn't I? And it said, because we were the only listing we actually got there, which I never would have got featured in a million years otherwise. And it said that Peter Brodnicki is either a genius or insane or something along those lines. So I think probably slightly more insane. So that was quite interesting.
Yeah.
So it was it was one of those pivotal moments where.
It sounds like you think ahead, though. That is vision there. There was turmoil at that time, but you're in it for the long. You're in the long game. So you're looking at, okay, I'm not going to go through this again. I'm doing it now.
Yeah, and then more recently, obviously, we've had COVID, we've had Liz Truss, we've had so many other things, that have massively disrupted the sector. Regulation can change, but regulation is an interesting one because, although it can be slightly misguided sometimes, generally it's all for the benefit of the customer. And arguably, the more regulation, the harder it is for some of us to meet those requirements and hit those standards. And actually, we sort of keep raising the bar. If regulation is putting the customer first, it's our job to embrace that regulation better than anybody else. And obviously, the more we do that, and the less our peers and competitors do, then that will create a challenge, consolidate the industry, increase the quality of the industry, the quality of advice, and everything else in the mortgage market. So that's actually a good thing. It can be disruptive. The changes over the last 25 years have happened on numerous occasions, and it brings its challenges. But generally, we're always in a slightly better position when it's introduced, and maybe other people are, because we're already thinking that way.
Yeah, I was going to say you're almost preempting. Is there anything? Of course, COVID. And the sort of financial crisis, there may be signs and indicators, but they then happen very quickly and cause mass disruption.
Yeah.
Is there anything that has been a specific, almost niche to your business, that has almost sort of caught you out or made you really have to think beyond what we've talked about?
Yeah, COVID was a good example because, the mortgage market shut for, depending which part of the country you were in, for about 4 months.
You can't legislate for that.
You can't legislate that. What do you do, right? So, what we had to do was sort of pivot our resources to go, rather than talking to new customers, was to speak to existing customers, because they would have been concerned about what's happening and how does that impact them and everything else. So we just used that time to re-engage with customers and be there just to reassure them. And actually, from those reassurance conversations, we've actually managed to do other areas of business with them, which was great. So that was the COVID piece. Was interesting, and then obviously that brought another set of challenges because everybody was working from home, and how do you bring them back in? And it's all well documented now what's happened, and but one of the things we did very quickly was just to make sure people understood contractually this is a temporary situation, and we brought them back into the office as quickly as we could do, because to us that was a very important part of our culture. And what we did also after COVID was, because we listened to, with people working from home for so long and trying to understand what they liked about it compared to working in the office. So that was another whole challenge we didn't expect, because, suddenly the working environment they were in was probably highlighted it was no longer suitable, because that evolution that might have taken 20 years happened in like a couple of months. So we took that opportunity to listen to our staff, work out what environment we needed to create for them to come back. And we learned from that working from home experience, and then completely reinvested in our offices and completely refurbed them and redesigned them. So depending on the types of people and the types of profile they had and the way they operate and work, rather than it being jobs, it was more about the people, because they all function different ways, want to work different ways, engage in different ways. So we changed the working spaces within the business to allow for those types of introverts, extroverts, whatever types of personalities they were. It wasn't about the job necessarily they did, but how did you get the best out of those people? So there was a huge learning experience, I guess, on the back of COVID, which actually helped fast track us in terms of putting our staff first. Because you can't put the customer first until you put your staff first and get them more engaged. So it was really a fascinating time for us, actually. So all these things we've learned stuff from. I probably were too focused on business, and I wasn't focused enough on the people in the business. So this was really quite a key moment for us, and we haven't looked back since then. We're not perfect by any stretch of the imagination, but we're improving every single day.
Yeah, and I guess it's like you've got building blocks in a business at any one time.
Yeah,
and you're focusing on revenue, focusing on profits, you're focusing on different things. But one of the constant things clearly is yourself. You mentioned when you were talking about the 2014 going through the whole process of listing, and you mentioned the word traumatic and so on. I'll bring this back to you. From starting the business to all the things you have to go through. How have you looked after your own kind of mental and physical fitness, if you like, and how have you prioritized it and been able to sort of balance whilst always facing forwards and trying to scale the business?
I think the whole thing of mental well-being, etc., is it's now common language. Christ, when I started the business, and probably not that long ago, you never wanted to be signed off and put anything on your record of a doctor in case you weren't given a job. So it's amazing how that has changed, and that's obviously for the better. I guess from my perspective, it's you handle things your own way and deal with things your own way, and and blokes probably aren't very good at chatting about stuff anyway.
Getting better, I think. We're doing it now, right? But I think 20 years ago would have been, but like you might have admitted that you'd pulled your calf playing football last night, but you wouldn't admit you're struggling.
No, you
with
wouldn't.
Your mental health, and that
no,
your marriage is struggling, or you weren't feeling right, and maybe I'm not sure if I've got depression. That conversation is potentially now happening. Certainly not 15 years ago.
No, and I guess I've just done what people used to do at that time is just sort of kick themselves into gear, because if a bad day can turn into a bad 2 days, a bad 2 days can turn into a bad week or a bad month or even a bad year. So to me, I'm you've got to sometimes let yourself have a sulk, and feel sorry for yourself, not that everybody else does, and then you just keep yourself back in.
Always keep going.
Always keep going.
Yeah.
You allow yourself to do it, but I have a cut-off point. In about 24 hours.
But what about there's plenty of coaching books where successful CEOs, which you are either giving information, or an author has collated all sorts of information where it's all about winning the morning, winning the day, running a marathon, reading a book.
Never read a motivational book of any sort, or any sort of how to run a business or how to motivate yourself. I follow my gut, what I feel want to do. I don't follow what's in a book. And I've seen people that do that, read a book and then follow it, and I go, yeah, that worked for that individual, might not work for you. So you've got to find your own way in life, I guess. And and I don't meditate, and I don't do any unbelievably don't do any exercise. Morning's my time. I'll get up really early. I'm in the office or working from used to be 4, probably now 5ish or 5:30.
So you do value the morning, interesting. So you're not interested in the exercise and the kind of, I think, say meditation.
Some people say I'll go to the gym early before I go to work, and I go.
Your tonic is work. You're stimulated.
I don't need to invigorate myself by going to the gym. I invigorate myself by actually having some peace time in the morning before the world goes crazy and everybody wants a piece of me. So I spend those 3 hours, getting on top of what I'm doing, my thinking time, my planning.
And that's in the office. That's not out for a walk and getting thinking time. You're in the office.
I'm either in the office or I'm up early at home. Mostly it's in the office. And that's the time I put myself in control of what I'm doing. But it's my gym, and people say, oh yeah, but you need to be healthy. But I get checked out for everything. You hear so many people now, and more recently I've heard that as well with close friends that have been diagnosed with serious illnesses and stuff. And the one thing I do is I check on absolutely everything. I get tested every year on just about everything to make sure that I know what's going on inside my body.
That's the control freak.
That's my control freak.
Yeah.
And it's sort of.
But that's not a bad thing.
Well, it's not, because eventually there's something I need to change in my lifestyle, and my results tell me I need to do that. That's exactly what I will do.
Yeah.
Right. But I want to know everything. I'm opposite to a lot of people. I want to know everything. Right. And that includes what's going inside. And you can't just work off symptoms, and doctors don't know all the answers. So, to me, I'd always suggest everybody does that, because it sort of, does give you that, life's too short, and, I love working, but I want to know I've got plenty of time still to enjoy life as well. So,
is there anything? So, you built a business over 25 years doing the numbers we talked about earlier. Is there anything you still want to achieve? Any award you still haven't won? Is there, because that whole focus you've got, that you've built this sort of empire, if you like. Is there something missing that you'd really like to achieve?
I think awards. I mean, ironically, they mean as much to me today as the first one did. Whether it's a personal one or a company one or a new area we got rewarded in, or one of our partner firms wins an award, it's fantastic. So I still get motivated by that, and I run through all of them. I write a lot of them, and I check every single one, and I'll get interviewed for a lot of them. I love it. It's to me, it's still my little motivation to keep going and fill that cupboard up a little bit more. So
I like that.
So the awards
still got ambition, still got.
Yeah, no, I still get excited as much about it as ever done. And I think, the other thing that sort of really drives me at the moment is that, over the 25 years I've been running this business, you try and aspire to be better than others in the industry and in the group. And to me, you always want to have someone to aim at, and or there to be a massive gap between you and the next person, and put your foot down. But you're sort of restricted with there are limits to what you can do. And of course, now we're moving into a world with, we've always built our own technology. That's always been a very big part of what we do. And now obviously we're adding AI into that. And I think we're going to go through a phase over the next 3 or 4 years, which is not going to be about regulation as much as how the consumer is changing, and how they're embracing technology, how we need to engage with them, and how much more we can learn about our customers, and how we should engage them, and when and in what way and with who, and when should it be technology, when should it be human beings, and everything else. So there's a real opportunity right now, and this is what really motivates me right now, is to completely take MAB and take it into the new world, and understand the role of the advisor in that world. And because I think there's absolutely a hugely important role for the advisor. Whatever technology may or may not be able to do, it's still a people business. It's still about trust. It's, but also we've got to digitize. We have to be a lot more efficient. We need to be able to predict what customers want, how they want to how they behave, and what they want. So there's, to me, suddenly in all these 25 years, is the first time we're going to have so much information and so much data that gives us the control to be able to evolve our proposition further, deliver a more personalized customer experience, to be able to understand how, where the threats and opportunities will come. Before we knew what the threat was, I don't know, the financial crisis had to deal with it today, and that was the end of it. Well, here we can sort of see what's happening. There's a lot of technology now, developments have happened in other sectors before financial services, because it's so regulated. So people stay out of that a little bit more. It's a bit slower to respond. So the nice thing is you've got that crystal ball of how consumers are behaving elsewhere in other sectors. They're not going to suddenly change because it's a mortgage. So it's really exciting, I think, what we can do now. So we had a capital markets day with our investors very recently, and potential new investors said, look, we've been listed for 10 years now. This is what we've been building, and this is what we're ready for now. And this is why we think we can start to shape how the world's going to look in our sector. So that's my current motivation.
Yeah.
So when are you going to step down? So no, I'm not stepping down. This is like, I've been waiting for this moment all my life.
Yeah.
This is the most exciting time.
You're coming alive saying it. I mean, it's like 25 years of doing
for a control freak. This is the perfect time of where we're in, because there is so much information, so much data, so much opportunity to make a real difference and to be stand out rather than just better. I'm not saying we're going to achieve it, but I'm on a mission, and
I can tell.
So is my team. So yeah, it's an exciting time.
Yeah. Someone watching, listening, what advice would you give to them with all that, again, maturity and perspective that you've got?
I think the advice I'll give to people is, a few people have asked me this over the years, and initially when you sort of get told you're an entrepreneur or you're successful, what advice would you give? You don't, sort of, as I said earlier, you don't really realize what you're doing differently. But as I thought about it more, the biggest thing I see, because there are people way more intelligent than me. A lot of my friends are, and my colleagues are, and everybody else. And I come across a lot of people that sort of know what the answer is, but they're just not prepared to make that final decision and commit to it. And I think the biggest strength I guess I've got, there's a lot of weaknesses, but a lot of strength, biggest strength I've got is that I can make decisions, and I'm not frightened of making decisions. But then if you make lots of decisions, you're going to get a lot wrong. And if you get a lot wrong, you've got to be very quickly prepared to U-turn on those decisions, rather than sit there trying to justify them that you were right all the time and let pride get in the way. So you can't do one without doing the other. You've got to make those decisions, and you've got to U-turn quickly if they're wrong, because then they won't all be right. And that's probably, I've seen people not succeed, and I've seen them, and I know they're capable of doing it, and I know they've got that, but they haven't been able to make those decisions. And you do have to gamble a bit. I mean, ultimately, they've got to be calculated gambles, but the point is, if you want to achieve something extraordinary in your life, you do have to take risks. It's as simple as that. And if you're not a risk taker, then, that's a problem. But then, of course, there's other things people have to consider. My partner currently has a lovely girl, and we've been together a while now, but I've never had any kids of my own. And I think to a large degree, I sacrificed that to put my business first. And I don't really, would I have taken some of those risks as readily as I did if I had, a family at home that I had to put first and look after? Don't know. Wasn't in that position, but I didn't put myself in that position. There are obviously very strong legitimate reasons why people don't make certain decisions, even though they know what the answer is. But also, timing life's everything as well. You can have the right answer, but just the time is wrong. And there's this little difference between being an entrepreneur and someone who's is not viewed as one.
And I can relate to that, everything you've said actually. But I think whether it's procrastination through fear, through lack of confidence, the reality is, I think you just got to, the advice there is just make sure you make a decision, because not making one could actually be far worse. And at least then you're moving, right? Back to what you said, if you're moving and then you can see that's the wrong decision, deal with it, spin round.
Yeah, and I think as I built my team, and I've got such a strong team around me now, the stronger the team around you, the more confidence you have as well, and the more, the better decisions, probably the more ballsy decisions you can make, because once you make a decision, someone's got to do all the hard work around it to deliver it.
Yeah,
it's come up with the decision, someone else has got to deliver it. So you've got to have confidence in your team, and the team is everything. The people are everything.
I love that. That's a brilliant way to end.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, good to see you.
Cheers.
Cheers.